Have you seen the proposal for the new browser shortcuts menu in the state of Missouri? Hello and welcome. Hi, I'm Dave. Today we're going to look at some very useful JavaScript and HTML code, but first I need to tell the story that made me think of this code, and it all happened in my next door neighbor, Missouri. I live in Kansas, very close to Kansas City, and a fun fact that many do not realize is that much of Kansas City is actually in the state of Missouri. So for me as a developer, this story hits very close to home. In mid-October, Mike Parson, the Missouri governor, announced that a hacker decoded the HTML code of a website to view the social security numbers of some educators. He went on to say the hacker had no authorization to convert and decode the code. But what really happened was a reporter discovered the educators' social security numbers in plain sight inside the HTML code and contacted the state to report the problem. Instead of thanking the reporter, the governor wanted to prosecute him. Clearly, Governor Parson doesn't understand how any of this works, and as expected, the tweet replies came back to him fast and furiously. This brings about a proposal for the new Missouri browser shortcuts menu, and I'd like to say the whole story is really a joke, but sadly only my proposal for the browser shortcuts is the joke, and everything else I shared really happened. So let's start coding today by looking at how data can actually be stored inside of an HTML element, but only be visible when you view the source code. Okay, I've got Visual Studio Code here on the left, and on the right I have got the Chrome DevTools open. I'm on the Element tab instead of the Console tab. If I was in Missouri, maybe they'd call this the Treason tab. With the document.event listener added here for the DOM content loaded event to fire, it will call the init-app function. The init-app function is currently empty, so we'll add some code to that. Notice I have made it an async function because we will await some data here. We're going to request data with this getPosts function, and it fetches the data from the JSON placeholder site. We're getting all of the posts, so we'll get that JSON data returned right here. Now, the function that I really want to draw your attention to is the build post list function. It's also async. We pass in the JSON data of the posts, and we start by creating a document fragment, and then we use for_of to loop through the posts. So we loop through and do something with each post in the posts data. Now, if you're wondering why I'm using for_of instead of for each, I have a tutorial about that, and it's because maybe I would want to await some more data here about the users within the loop. So if I were to call another async function in here, I wouldn't want to use for each. Again, I do have a tutorial about that. Now, what we do here is create a paragraph for each post. We apply some text content that gives the post title, but then this is the real key here, and this is what may have happened on that Missouri website. We've got a data set property. This allows us to store data inside the HTML as an attribute, but it's not displayed on the page. So here we're going to put in the post ID and the user ID, whoever made the post. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, we've got 100 paragraphs coming back from the post. So we're creating a paragraph for each one. Maybe we want to refer to a specific post ID when that title is clicked on. If we add another event listener, and maybe that would display the body of the post. So this would allow us to do that with a query selector. We could grab that one specific paragraph based on the data in this data set. Likewise with the user ID, if we wanted more author information, this might allow us to then put in a data request back to the API for that user information. So we don't want this post ID or user ID displayed on the page, but we do want it related to each paragraph we've created. And this is how we do that. So what may have happened in Missouri would be creating an ID, but somebody didn't know what a social security number was, and they saw that in the database as a unique ID, so maybe they stuck that in a data set. I don't know. I haven't seen the exact code. I'm not Sherlock Holmes, but that could be what happened. So after that, after we create these paragraphs, of course, without any social security number or other information, you don't want to put any information in HTML that would have a security risk for anyone. But after we create the paragraphs, we're going to append them to the fragment, and then that fragment is eventually appended to the main element. So it only updates the DOM once. And that's much faster than using inner HTML, much more efficient. And I have a tutorial about that as well. So now that we've gone over the build post list, let's put that up here in the init app function and call these functions to go ahead and populate our HTML. So we're going to start by defining posts, and then we'll just await the get posts function, and we'll get all 100 posts back. After we do that, we'll await the build post list. And you could say, why am I awaiting that? Because I'm not really doing anything after it right now, but we will in the future. So I'm going to put build post list, if I could spell list, there we go. I need to pass in that post data. So now let's save. And now our HTML has changed over here. So let's look at what we get with those data set properties that we set right down here. So I'll click on this, and of course it will hide the Visual Studio Code window, but now we can see our HTML, and we've got these 100 post titles over here. So if we clicked on any specific one, and you could right click and of course get in trouble in Missouri again by viewing the HTML source code, or at least the governor wants to get you in trouble for doing that. We've got the data post ID attribute, and then we also have the data user ID attribute. Now notice how there are dashes. So the dash comes after the data, and we use data set, but in the HTML it's just represented as data, and then there's a dash, and then we used camel case in the JavaScript, and here, this is got another dash. So for every capitalized letter, as we capitalized ID, the I in ID using camel case, that's where it will add a hyphen. So you could get several hyphens if you used camel case for several different words in that data set attribute in the JavaScript. So here we've got user ID of 1, and notice each of the first 10 posts will all be from the same user, and because there's 10 users in this test data, and then each one of those users has made 10 posts. But so the post ID continues to increment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. So now we've got all of this data. Now let's go back to Visual Studio Code and see how we could possibly select that in our code if we wanted to just retrieve some of these specific posts after they were posted to the HTML. So let's start out by getting, let's call this user2 posts. And we just want the posts that were created by user number 2 or user ID 2. So we have document.query selector, and this needs to be an all. And now we're going to select the paragraphs. And if this code doesn't wrap, I'm going to press Alt-Z to make sure it starts wrapping if I haven't done that. And now let's get this data-user-ID attribute. And yes, the code is already wrapping. If it's not wrapping on your screen, press Alt-Z in Visual Studio Code to do that. At least for me on Windows, that's what I do. I'm going to look for the user ID equal to the number 2. And then I need to close the bracket here. And after that, we need to have our quote, and we do. And so I believe we finished the statement there. So this looks a little strange. There's no space between the paragraph here and the attribute. So this is just wrapped all on one line. There would be no space between the P and this attribute here, the data user ID. So we're selecting any of the posts by user ID number 2. And then let's go ahead and view these in the console. So I'm going to say for const post of user2 posts. And then we'll just log to the console log, and we'll say post.dataset, because that's how we can access that data set inside of JavaScript. So we'll save. And now I need to switch over to the console and see what we get here. And there we go. We're getting DOM string maps because that's what the data set creates. So now you're seeing we're not just looking at the user ID, we're also looking at the post ID. And you can see the user ID 2 or user 2, user with the ID of 2, created 10 posts. If I scroll all the way up here, starting with post number 11 and ending at post 20, because we only logged the full data set to the console. So if we wanted to specifically get one piece of that information, then we would come back and say .user ID like that, or .post ID like that. Either way, but the data set creates a DOM string map, and it will contain these different keys and values for those keys. And as I mentioned, this can be very useful when you're selecting data from the web page. If you want to refer back to that, or possibly add an event listener to one of 100 paragraphs, or you've added an event listener to all of the paragraphs, but you want to specifically get more data about that one paragraph, that would be an example where data set could be very, very handy. Okay, I'm going to comment out this code because we don't want that for the next example. Save and move over to the main.js file that I've created. And now that we've talked about why we may want to store data in the HTML and how useful that could be, and how a mistake may have happened in Missouri when they were storing social security numbers in the HTML, let's talk about the phrase that the governor actually used. He said someone decoded the HTML. So I've created a decode the HTML function here. Now, normally HTML doesn't really need to be decoded. We can tell what it is saying just by reading it, especially semantic HTML, which is the ideal way to write your HTML. That, of course, conveys meaning with the tags you're using. But decoding the HTML, what could we possibly decode? Well, I thought about this, and we could decode HTML entities. So let's create a quick function that does that. And here we'll define a parser, because what exists in JavaScript is what is called a DOM parser. And DOM parsers can decode XML and HTML. So let's go ahead and see what this can do for us, especially when it comes to HTML entities. So the parser returns an HTML document when we do this. So we'll call this next variable doc, which is short for document, and we'll say parser dot parse from string. And now we can pass in whatever HTML we want to here. So that's what I'm going to put. And then after that, we need another parameter, and we need to tell it text HTML. You can see the options here even are XML or HTML. So we want the HTML. After we've done that, we want to return, and then we can return doc.documentElement, which is the element in the document we've created here, and then the text content. Now, it would actually be a full HTML document. So if we just loaded the doc itself into the console, we would see the actual HTML tag, the body tag, and so on. But the text content referred to like this will just refer to the text content that we have parsed from the string here. So that has created the function. Now let's go ahead and call the function. So I'm going to drop down a line, type console log, and here I'll say decode the HTML. And what we're going to pass in, we could do this several different ways. It needs to be a string, but HTML entities can appear with a number code like this. And let's go ahead and do this one first. And we save, and we get the copyright symbol over here. So we decoded this HTML entity, and it gives us the copyright symbol. But they can also have words that they're known for. So we could say and copy and do the same. And now we've got the copyright symbol again. So you could do either one. You can decode. And the other thing that is important to know, let's put this up here above, it will not decode words that you want to keep. So if you were referring to the text content or the inner HTML content of an element, you could have copyright, and then of course the copyright symbol, and then the year, and we save. It will not change the things that are not HTML entities here. So we've really got a nice decoder for HTML entities, and then it turns this into text. So you could just store the symbol as text. Let's do a couple more, and then I'm going to put a link in the description of this video that will link to a full list of HTML entities that you can use. But let's use one called map here, and I think there's one called hearts, and let's save again. And this map symbol is a little different. And then there's a heart as well. And there's all kinds of different HTML entities that you can use. So clearly the Missouri governor was not referring to decoding HTML entities, but I did want to show that the phrase decode the HTML could actually be applied when we decode HTML entities. Now let's look at one more way to do this, and that also allows us to encode HTML entities, which can be much more difficult to write your own function for. So I'm going to expand Visual Studio Code here, come over to this main1.js, and you can see I am requiring a npm package called HE, and of course that stands for HTML entities. I'm going to pull npm.js over here, and you can see when I search for HE, we get a robust entities encoder and decoder. You can click on that link and get many more details about this package, how to use it in Node.js and other places as well. And one way we could also do that is go to CDN.js if you're not using Node and you just want to link to it inside of your HTML. So in linking to a library or package, you can do that as well. So search for HE, and then you'll get the link to include in a script tag inside of your HTML right here, and you can just copy that script tag as well. So either way, you can find a way to use this HE package, and it is very, very handy. So what I've done is already pre-install it with npm I HE, and I'm going to use Node. So to do that, I'm going to pull up a bash window here, and I did that with the control and the back tick. You could also go to a terminal and choose new terminal window. If you're not familiar with Node, I'm not going to go over all of that, but I do have tutorials on Node and on NPM as well. But basically I've already installed this package by typing npm I and then HE. We've got the package. I'm using NodeMon for a dev environment, so I type npm run dev, and it will launch this code, but I don't have much going on. But anytime I make changes now, it's kind of like live server, it will reload the code. And now down here is where we'll see the console results, down here in the terminal, not in the browser console. So let's look at a couple of examples of using this. So I'm going to type console.log, and then after we've required HE up here, I can just type he.encode. And then let's go ahead and provide what we were providing before, copyright, and then we need that copyright symbol. So I'm just going to copy it because we're encoding, we're not decoding now. So got the copyright symbol, and I put the year as well. Let's go ahead and save. And now look below, we get this. It's not quite what we had before. It's not the and copy, or it's not the number 169 either. It's a little bit different code. So we need to provide an option here that will go ahead and give us that. So after we put in our string, we can put in a options object, and here we can say decimal, and then set that to true. Now let's go ahead and save, and now we get the number 169 like we were using before in our code. So that allows us to encode the way we're used to seeing it. And then let me go ahead and copy this down. If we want to encode with the name instead, we can do that as well. And here we'll put it in the options, we'll put another option. We'll say use named references and set that to true. And now if I save, you can see on the next line we get the and copy down here. So a very easy way to encode HTML entities is to use this HE library. Now, like we had before, we can also say console.log and he.decode, and now we can pass in some information just as we were before. Let's go ahead and leave the decimal option in here. And we're going to decode the symbol, and let's see what we get back. Actually, we're not going to decode the symbol. I get turned around sometimes. We need to decode the code that we get, which will give us the symbol. There we go. And so now we've got the symbol down here inside of the console as well. And we can do that with some others just like we did before. So let's go ahead and decode the name too. So let's see what we get now. Got another symbol. Oh, we had 169 down here as well. Let's change this to one of the other names like map. And now we got the map symbol as well. So now we know how to decode the HTML and encode the HTML, but we're referring to HTML entities. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.